So I found out something about Court of Thorns and Roses, and I didn't think I could be madder at that book, but I had just a little more to give. But at the same time, when I initially found out what I had found out, I was infuriated, and I actually made a video that I have since deleted, and I've been trying to reconfigure it. And I've calmed down somewhat, and I've also kind of realized my own mistakes in the matter. And that is the chasing trends as a writer. And this is almost a little difficult to talk about because part of what I've always wanted to do or always wanted when I wrote was like I would read things and I would be dissatisfied with what I had read. I mean, I would like it for the most part, and then there'd just be something wrong, and it'd be like, oh, I would have done it differently, and yeah, and then the more I read, when you got away from like the classics, like Lord of the Rings or whatever, you realize just like the churn and burn of the market and just how bad a lot of books have gotten and the lack of editing, etc., etc. Everything I've been talking about on this channel, essentially. And I always kind of approached my writing at a certain point. I approached it from the point of view of I wanted to improve on these things and show how you can do them well. And that's essentially what my first book, The Chaos Child, is. It's a retelling of an obscure fairy tale, which is the story of Tam Lin. Now, this is a fairy tale that originates in Scotland. I think the first iteration that we know of comes about in the 1500s or so. It was turned into a ballad in the 1700s. But for the most part, most people don't know of this story's existence. It is probably my favorite fairy tale. It has a lot of unique features to it. I mean, not only is it actually about fairies for once, but the girl saves the guy. And so for those in the know, or those who really loved their fairy lore and knew of this story, they loved trying to retell it. And I would chase down a lot of modern retellings of this story, and they would all fall short. And there's a reason for that. But to get into that reason, I have to summarize this story, which is that it is about a noble woman or girl named Janet who stumbles on this fairy glen that is like half in fairy, half not, where she runs into Tam Lin, who is kind of stuck in that glen. And she's enamored, they have congress, and she goes home and finds out she's pregnant. Now, interestingly enough, the story does have this. Her relatives tell her to abort it. She refuses. She goes back to the fairy glen, and she tells Tam Lin, hey, you asshole, you need to step up. And Tam Lin's like, oh, yeah, I would, but, I'm about to get sacrificed at the tithing on Halloween. See ya. The tithing is, every 7 years, the fairy courts on Halloween would tithe one of their own to the lords of hell. It's unclear if this is like a fairy or a human, because Tam Lin is technically human, but with fairy characteristics, like he's been stuck in fairy for long enough. I don't know, it gets kind of like, it gets a little weird, and don't question it, right, because it's an old story, right? So Janet's like, oh, hell no you're not, I'm gonna save you. And so she follows him to the tithe. She's told to save him, she has to hold on to him tightly. and not let him go no matter what. So the Fairy Queen turns him into various objects and monsters and whatever, and Janet keeps holding on to that baby daddy. And then eventually, you know, the trials end, they go home, they live happily ever after. Yeah. So, I don't know if you noticed the problems. I love this story. It is so unique. I mean, because first of all, it's not Princess pricks her finger on a spindle. It's not Princess dies eating an apple and has to get kissed by the prince, right? It is a girl saying, yeah, I'm gonna take my own shotgun to the wedding. And it's uniquely Scottish, I think. Scotland did give more agency to their women for them. Like, women in Scotland can inherit titles and land, even as far back. And yeah, I mean, like I said, there was like abortion was mentioned in the story, and obviously, like, no one judged that she got pregnant. They judged that she kept the baby. But yeah, the problem obviously is Tam Lin. Tam Lin is a jerk. It is said in the story that Janet is not the first girl he's done this to. He often would take advantage of girls who came into his clearing, usually virgins, and Janet is just the first one to say, yeah, I'm taking back my own. So whenever people do retellings of this story, they make two mistakes, which is one, they want to make it more feminist than it actually is. They go, oh, girl saves guy, and assume you can make it more modern. Not true. I mean, at the end of the day, Tam Lin was going to get a shotgun to the back no matter what. One way or another, he was either going to die or he was going to marry the girl. No one was going to let him get away with that. And it's not that it's not, when you look into like the moralization of fairy tales and purpose of fairy tales, this one squarely falls into don't sleep with random strangers, girls, lest you know, get pregnant and have to save them from hell. Or we have to force them to marry you. Not ideal, right? The second one is like Tam Lin himself. And the problem with most of the retellings of this is that they want to make Tam Lin a nicer person. And you simply can't, because if you make him less of an asshole, he ends up being more of a jerk. Like, no matter what, he is manipulative. He is using this girl in more ways than one. One, you know, sexually, and two, using her to save his life with no regard for her feelings or circumstances. And every version that I've read seems to really, like, even if they try so hard to make him nice, he just comes out as worse, because then he's just this great manipulator, and if you just, like, run, girl, run, right? It's toxic to the max. So I discovered when watching a synopsis of A Court of Thorns and Roses that, yeah, my instinct of that Tam Lin character in the story, yeah, that's because it's partially based off of Tam Lin. It's Beauty and the Beast and Tam Lin. Which is so infuriating, because it's like, okay, Sarah J. Maas, you know enough to know the story of Tam Lin. You're not going into it again. Not going into it again. What really, really hurts about it, though, is that I wrote the Chaos Child as my version of Tam Lin. Because I really wanted a better retelling of that story. And the way I like to think I fixed the problem, but the way I did that was I leaned in to my version of Tam Lin being an absolute jerk. Oh, first of all, I didn't call him Tam Lin and I didn't call him Tom. I've never seen anyone rename it or try. Yeah, I just went with two totally different characters and said that the Tam Lin actually happened in my universe. But yeah, no, I leaned into the guy being an absolute jerk. He 100% uses her. He 100% is a womanizer. When he finds out that she might be able to save him, he doesn't, like, he asks. He doesn't shy away from it. He's like, I'll use you. And then I went with his character arc is realizing that he can't just manipulate and use people to get out of his situation, and he has to face the music. He has to own up to the consequences of his actions. And so he does everything that Tam Lin does in the story, but he gets character growth. And then I also did not make my heroine a feminist girl boss or whatever. She is actually trying to escape her destiny and trying to, live a normal life in extraordinary circumstances and doesn't want any part of this. And I'm proud of it for the most part. But it was probably my biggest mistake in doing that for my first book. And I hesitate when I say this because I think your first book should be your worst book. By no means does that mean it's a bad book, by the way. It means that there is so much you need to learn when you go to publish a book, even if you do it through publishers. Learning how to edit and work with an editor and work on layout and covers and even just the process of writing a book. You don't know how to write a book until you've written a book. And so I do believe at the end of the day that Chaos Child was a good debut. I think it does that. It was such a huge, steep learning curve that I'm glad it's this book and not something I almost care about more. And I know that's strange, but at the end of the day, you don't want your first book to be the best book, because then where do you go from there? I actually had someone tell me at the time, she shouldn't be publishing this. It's not that good. Your first book needs to be strong. And I'm like, okay, you just told me I should never read any of your subsequent books then. So I'm proud of it. I do appreciate it, and I do like it for the most part, and I do want people to read it. However, if I knew then what I knew now, I still think I would have gone ahead with publishing it, but I would have lowered my expectations. For the most part, I had a pretty successful campaign with it. I matched my goal and then some, and was able to do a print run, and I have been able to sell almost all the copies I've printed. But I was baffled because at the time I went, hey, fairies are popular, I'm retelling an obscure fairy tale, I think I'm adding to this genre in a way that hasn't been done in a very long time. And then I realized, yeah, that was bullshit of me. I'm just a dime a dozen. No one's gonna be able to find me because I offer nothing unique to the romantasy genre. Because if I'm honest with myself, it was a romantasy book. And as the year has progressed since publishing, and I've analyzed it and looked at what happened with it, and I go, oh, I didn't fail because I put out a bad book. I failed because I put out a good book in an oversaturated market, and frankly, no one cares. It's also the fact that the audience for this book is overwhelmingly an audience that I've said I do not necessarily want to be catering to. It's niche. It actually is way more niche, and you saw my previous video. You know what I feel. So there's that. There's also other things, like I actually just pulled it off the shelf to look at it because I just finished the layout of To Private Ford Rayburn, and I ordered a prototype. And I realized I fell for every trap in the book. The font is a little too big, because I just wanted it to be, 250 pages, or whatever the book is. I forgot. I wanted it to be look longer than it actually was. I want it to be more legit than it actually was. No, okay, not that it's not legit. That's not what I mean. The cover is beautiful, and I love my cover artist, and I think the cover stands out, but at the end of the day, it screams romantasy. And then again, it's a retelling of a fairy tale. A retelling of a fairy tale that I did not realize people were already familiar with. I didn't realize that because most people I asked about it said, I have no idea what Tam Lin is. And then I went, well, did you read A Court of Thorns and Roses? And they did. And I'm like, oh, I hate everything. Because that's how bad A Court of Thorns and Roses is at the end of the day. It's so bad that the fairy tale you're retelling, you didn't even bring people to. You so butchered it. And she did. She butchered the hell out of it. She somehow did the worst version, and I've seen some horrendous versions of this story. Okay. By the way, outside of my book, the only version retelling I recommend for the story of Tam Lin, if you're interested. If you're like, some people like to collect Beauty and the Beast retellings. I like to collect Tam Lin retellings. It's Diana Wynne Jones, Fire and Hemlock. It has its issues, and I mean it has some really, really bad issues. But it's still really good because it's Diana Wynne Jones. She wrote Howl's Moving Castle, and yeah. So so it's still a good story. It's the only one I recommend outside of my own version of it. And this is where I think, in analyzing what I did wrong and admitting my mistakes with that launch, it's hard because I've also lowered expectations for To Private Ford Rayburn. But I also know that there isn't a lot on the market like To Private Ford Rayburn. I think the only thing that in some ways sinks my chances with it is that it's written by me and I'm a female. And before you all say misogyny, that's not what I mean. It's because it's a very male-oriented book. And I be the first to admit that, yes, I am a woman, I am not a man. I do not want to assume I know how men think and feel. I like to think that I produce something that captures the heroism and, desire for a good, wholesome story that I think people are looking for today. Plus a lot of action and adventure. Which, that's the other thing about The Chaos Child, was I went to reread it the other night, and so I always said that I wouldn't put out something that I couldn't reread. And I did reread The Chaos Child like a couple months ago and really enjoyed it. I couldn't reread it. And the reason I couldn't reread it was I realized it wasn't what I wanted to write, actually. I wanted to do a retelling of Tam Lin. I did a retelling of Tam Lin. I'm not going to do another retelling of Tam Lin. But in writing to Private Ford Rayburn, which I really challenged myself when I was writing it, I never thought I could do action sequences. Suddenly I was doing tons of them, and I can't imagine writing something without doing some sort of action set piece. The Chaos Child it's just slice of life, which is fine. It's like, it's cozy. If you want just simple, low-key, two characters getting to know each other and we, the audience, getting to know them, it's fun. I do like character pieces, but it was just so lackluster, especially after editing to Private Ford Rayburn and, you know, getting swept up in the action and the tension, and it was like, oh, this is so great. And that was the final nail in the coffin of like, that's it, isn't it? Like, at the end of the day, the problem with romantasy is that nothing happens in romantasy. There's so little tension, there's so little action, there's so little anything. And the point is that it's romance, fine, and fantasy. And then I kept going, I went back in my head, okay, let's forget the romance part, let's just look at the fantasy part. What was the last fantasy book that I read that really, really had any serious action in it? Okay, what was the last thriller book that I read that had any serious action in it? People just don't write action. There was even like a fantasy military series that I tried to read where like I had to stop because all the fight sequences were like they walked in, saw their targets, killed their targets, that was it. And I'm like, okay, I get that this is supposed to be realistic, like you're highly elite so you'll be able to take out anyone immediately, but this is not exciting. Like, I want a little bit of tension, I want a little bit of back and forth. This isn't it. And partially I think that's just, I know when I was like coming up and writing and, you know, as a teenager and in my early 20s, I really shied away from it because I thought, okay, this is just too hard. And I don't know if that's true anymore, as much as there's something about how we're taught to write, something about what we see on the page. Like, I never really liked suspense novels because I felt like they were just manipulating me into feeling things without actually doing anything. And that still holds true. And so I didn't want to write that. And then I realized a lot of like action-y books that I read were just that, were just suspense, where it's pretending something's happening and manipulating your emotions without actually properly setting up anything. And there isn't actually all that much action on the page. Partially it's hard to write action. I think I've said this before, you know, it's visually it's easier, but there's something to be said about it. And even if it's not action, just the tension of a scene, like, we're not really primed to write like that. And so my disappointment in The Chaos Child is that I didn't really give it a lot of attention, even at the end. And while I still think it's a good book, I still think it's well written, I still think it's a good story, and I love what I did with this retelling, at the end of the day, it's a dime a dozen amongst, if I'm gonna rail against it, I have to admit it to myself, I wrote one. And I've since moved on from that, and I moved on fairly quickly. And all because I challenged myself to do it, and suddenly I can't imagine not doing it in what I continue to write. So I'm hoping To Private Ford Rayburn is a little more successful. I think it will be. I think it has more going for it. And it's not romantasy. It has romance. I will never not put romance in my books. I love romance. But it's not just romance.